All right. Hi, everybody. This is Adam Barrett from Apex Ridge. And I'm here today with three attorneys, and I'm not in trouble. But they reached out to me. We started having this great conversation about UC7 and how it can be used in ways beyond what I've, described. And so they're from White and Williams. It's Bill Kennedy. Hey, Bill, how's it going?
Hey, everybody.
Okay. And Jim Berger.
Hello.
And they specialize in product liability. And Frank Bruno, hey, Frank, is a patent attorney. And because they're lawyers, there's a disclaimer we have to throw out up front. So they wanted to remind everybody that they are not your lawyers, not yet. If you, of course, you can, hire them to be a part of any of your initiatives. Nothing said today should be considered legal advice. If you have questions for them, please just contact them, and the contact information will be in the description. So I am a reliability engineer. I own Apex Ridge Reliability Engineering Consulting. And, I help companies in lots of different industries, ensure that their products are reliable and always work in their customers' hands. And I do it in two ways. I work with their engineering teams to implement a design for reliability practices, which are covered in my first book, How Reliable is Your Product? 50 Ways to Improve Product Reliability. And I also work with leadership to ensure that they are setting up a culture and an organization that ensures that you get the best ROI from those tools. And that's covered in my new book, Reliability Culture. And I have a concept that I often share, which is called UC7, which is a tool I came up with to help in product development. And the idea, quite simply, is that in UC7, the idea is when you're discovering use cases to figure out the stresses and environments that your product could be used in, usually we define about 3 base use cases, and then sometimes we'll define 3 others. But there's a general feeling of trying to create use cases by the team that they want the customer to use it, not always how they use it. So this idea of use case 7 is, what's that extreme case? That case that you might consider abuse, but the customer considers okay. And if we explore that, what can we discover? Because so many reliability failures and issues sometimes are the customer using it the way they want, not how you intended. And sometimes that's a bigger population of your customers than you think. So these guys reached out to me when they heard about the concept and said they love it. And one of the reasons why they love it is with their customers, they often engage with them after things have happened in the field and there's litigation and there's, disputes. And they love the idea of helping their clients in advance of that. How do we proactively ensure that that doesn't happen instead of reactively? And the idea of use case 7, can your customer take that lawnmower you designed, use it to cut the hedges, and then drop it on drop it on themselves and cut their foot? Is it possible that they could do that? Should we consider, or should we figure out a way to explore, if that can happen, and how can we mitigate in advance them doing that, or mitigating the effect of them doing that, and it having, strong issues? You could, maybe in that case, as an engineer, I'm immediately thinking, well, when you turn the lawnmower sideways, it turns off automatically. It has a leveling cutoff switch, right? That kind of thing. And, them wanting their customers to do that kind of thing. So I was very excited. I said, let's do a video on it. And they're very into that. So, all right, guys, let's start talking about it.
Well, Adam, I had something very intelligent to say, but I'm going to yield to people who actually know what they're talking about.
All right. That means that's the guy who's going to say the best thing in this. So
Yeah. Well, Adam's right. What I said when I first started looking at use case 7 with my lawyer hat on, it was a concern for my clients. And I said, if you do this, what's going to happen to your test results? Because in the law, you are afforded a defense as a product manufacturer or designer if someone misuses your product. But there's a balance in the law between misuse and foreseeable uses that weren't really intended. So foreseeable misuse. And so one of the questions I had for Adam when I first saw this was, well, how do you define a use case 7? It can't just be sitting around thinking of the strangest thing you can do. You have to have a parameter and look at your use environments, your typical users. Because if it's just thinking of strange things to do with products, it can really hurt a product manufacturer, because then you're taking misuse and making it foreseeable. And it's hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube after you've thought of something and tested it to say, well, we never anticipated that, so we couldn't design or warn for it.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting, because that's the difference between the legal hat and the engineering hat. So for me, I do want to brainstorm and think of the most ridiculous thing I can think of. Not that that's going to happen, but just because then in that exploration and then reeling it back into which ones I really want to talk about, I'm ensuring I've captured the degree I want. Whereas if, as we're discussing it, I'm limiting it, I never know if I've really, it's that brainstorming concept. There's no bad ideas initially, right? Let's get them all out there. But from your perspective, you have now, as a product developer, documented that you thought that could happen. And then you have to explain why you chose not to, mitigate the effects of that. And I've been on the other side. I've been hired as a technical specialist in very large lawsuits where, I feel horrible, but if I'm on the prosecuting side, it's so easy from a legal standpoint for me to go through their root cause analysis and things they've said and done to be like, well, they knew that was a possibility, but it breaks my heart because I'm an engineer and I know that that's the way you should look at things, but you do create that exposure. So that's something I'm actually very interested in learning from you today, or hearing your thoughts on how can engineers walk that fine line of doing what is truly responsible in my mind and thinking about the guy who uses his lawnmower to trim his fingernails, and just how ridiculous that is. But how do you do that without exposing yourself to the guy who does it and then sues you? So that to me is an interesting thing. I'm very interested in hearing your perspective on that.
Well, Adam, I think your experience really hits the nail on the head, because sooner or later, the manufacturer who has a product that could cause harm, whether it's industrial product, consumer product, that manufacturer is going to have an engineer like you come in and do the testing. The question is, are they going to do it before it goes out, the product goes out the door, and try to design it away or warn it away or instruct it away? Or are they going to come back and have to see someone like you coming in later when there's been an injury? And you might be an expert for the defense, you might be an expert for the plaintiff who's prosecuting the case, but someone else is going to come in later and say, well, why didn't we think of at least use case 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6? Maybe 7 is too far, maybe 8 is too far, but yet you have to have a sense of what your product can and can't do, because sticking your head in the sand is never the right idea.
What would you advise? So what would you advise if I had the luxury of, so a failure modes effects analysis is a tool where effectively the team sits down and hypothetically, proactively identifies risks and ranks them by severity, likelihood of occurrence, all these things. And, then uses that as input to improve the design. And they quantitatively score them. And then, the idea is it's a tool for making sure you put your resource in the best area until you run out of resource. So of course you can't address everything, but you're ensuring you address the best ones. Unfortunately, FMEAs are a great piece of evidence in a lawsuit because it shows that you discussed it. So what would you advise if I was in the middle of an FMEA and I'm working with a team that's gun shy and they want to use terms that instead of it possibly exploding, it could have a spontaneous disassembly event, right? Or that, instead of on fire, it's, it thermally is exceeding expectations, and they're in that mindset. And in my mind, they're really hurting the process, because if we talked about it openly, we probably might find some ways to mitigate some of these things, and we're going to lose out on that. So let's say I got to that point and I called you. What would you say to me and the team?
Well, disclaimer, this is not legal advice.
Of course.
But I think one of the important things is when you're doing an analysis like that, a failure modes analysis, is sometimes we don't see people bring those to an end, that they're left open-ended, and really there should be a conclusion. It has been concluded that this is extremely unlikely based upon no reported incidents like this. And think it through, I think, farther towards a conclusion, I think would be helpful, because as you pointed out, when a failure modes analysis document comes up in litigation, some of them are incomplete, but some of them also, like you say, you can tell, that they've been avoiding kind of the issues. So there's, like most things, it's a balance between, like Bill pointed out, you can't stick your head in the sand, because that is simply, it's not good design, it's not good risk management, it's not good for anybody. But you need to find a balance and be able to document exactly why you felt something was not a risk and resources shouldn't be put there. That's in a nutshell what I would say is carry it forward to its conclusion and document all the way out to why you reach that conclusion.
Okay, so that's a very helpful. So what you're saying is the balance is feel free to explore it, brainstorm, but do not just leave, some of those lower ranking items that you're not going to address because the occurrence was low, severity was lower. Don't just leave the action item thing open-ended. Make the comment that this was not going to be addressed because it ended up with a risk, because we have risk priority numbers, or the N ways we rank it. And you could say the risk priority number ranked it low enough that it seemed that the likelihood of this occurring is so low that it was not something we felt needed to be addressed. And simply by saying that, you are now taking away that element in a legal suit showing intent, right? Because things happen, but probably most, legal suits kind of, come down to, did you know what was your intention? And you're saying document your intention that you believed it wasn't a risk.
Or even document, based on our analysis, we think this event occurs primarily through misuse.
Yeah.
And here's the real devil in the mix there is that sometimes the company's intent or carefulness is not a consideration. That is the law in some of our 50 states, bearing in mind each state has its own set of statutes and common law, judge-made law, judicial opinions. And within each state, there's a wide variance from one state to another as to whether the manufacturer's thoughtfulness and carefulness is a defense. In some states, it's not. If the product is unsafe for whatever reason, either in its design or lack of warnings or lack of instructions, then it's defective no matter how much care they put into it. Still, and I happen to practice in one of those states, Pennsylvania. I practice in Philadelphia, and Jim is both in Philadelphia and New Jersey as litigators. Frank is also in mute right now, is where Frank is right now. But in my home state, I've had a case where it's not relevant as to how careful you were, but when the opposing attorney takes the testimony of your best engineer, the one who had the most responsibility, and they ask her, did you know that this could happen? And her answer is, yes, we knew it could happen. I had this occur once where the plaintiff lawyer thought he had the aha moment. I've got you. You knew it could happen. And it was wonderful, Adam, because she had done what you were implying and what Jim was saying earlier, which is they had documented what the risk was, how extreme it was, how unforeseeable it was in everyday usage. What's unforeseeable in your lab is a whole lot different than what's unforeseeable to the people on the street who are using the product, or in this case, industry who are using the product. And so we had a great story to tell. We had a great explanation. And although it wasn't legally relevant, when we had to try that case, getting that testimony in from the engineer is what turned the jury from being sympathetic to an obviously tragic injury and a very severe case, and had them realize it's not about being sympathetic. The jury's job, the whole concept of product liability is, let's see whether it was safe. And her memos documented that this was the right decision to have made. It was the key in winning the case.
So that was it. That was the difference, is that you capture what probably is always dialogue in the room, right? Like, okay,
what if we had a form,
so low, but capturing
like,
that.
Is there a form? Is there a template? I mean, if we can brainstorm and come up with something, Bill and Jim and with Adam saying, this is the framework for what the discussion for look like. And here are the boxes that we want you to fill out so that you don't walk out of the room with dangling evidence or places where you didn't check the box and say, we're finished with this and we've decided why. Would that be helpful?
Frank, I thought the same thing. We've been talking about a failure mode effects analysis, which is generally a form, but perhaps it should be tweaked. Perhaps it needs to have additional information on it, just like you're saying, Frank, that to force the brainstorm down to the paper, to force, is this effect the result of misuse? And maybe it needs to be expanded so people aren't, as Adam points out, gun shy in that room, trying to call things that catch on fire thermally challenged,
Right.
or whatever it was.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can just tell you my first thought, having been in hundreds or maybe thousands of FMEAs, is that I think it would be the instruction and giving the reason for the instruction that would be a big part of it, because, in the FMEAs, you have your comments section, you have your next action section. But as engineers, we're thinking that's for the engineering, right? So we're putting comments of the things that we want to do, or further explanation of why we ranked it high and all that stuff. And then we get to the ones that we're like, we're not doing anything on that. And we might say why, but we don't bother writing it in because this is for engineering. So I think it could be, maybe in the FMEA process, engaging with the legal team at your company and saying, can you help us make sure that our comments and, such and such capture this full discussion that we've had, because they've probably had it, right? I think that it might be as simple as including a legal representative in the company at the end of the FMEA.
And with that, some companies have a very good legal staff. And sometimes the legal staff is really more experienced in transactional work, contracts and labor and employment disputes than they are in product liability. Sometimes manufacturers will, just as they call you, Adam, they might call us on the before side rather than the after side. And we get a chance to sometimes weigh in on how that documentation should really look, because the documentation may differ based on what your product is used for. Is this an industrial product? Is this going to be a component product for another completed product? Is this a product that's likely going to be modified by someone else? Is it a medical device? Is it a regulated device? Or is it a consumer good that might be used by children? Those kind of factors might influence how that documentation actually goes. But the concept of either designing out the risk or explaining why you can't design it, or you're choosing not to design it out, warning against the risk, or explaining why you're not going to warn about it, that's the key, I think, to making sure good products are out on the market and that they're not being abused and causing any injury.
Yeah. This is phenomenal, because this is such a simple step. Well, to me, our initial proposal of how to address it is just simple step with such a big impact, right? Because that legal team usually only gets to see that FMEA when the lawsuit's in motion and it gets pulled up in discovery, right? And they're like, oh, Jesus, guys, why did you not just, just that agony of knowing what simply could have been written down that would have made all the difference.
Yeah, if it's done right up front, it's not very painful on the back end of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Frank, you were telling me before we got online about how even in the patent application process, engineers will be pointing out potential consequences of use of the product, and how that can sometimes even affect the design from the IP side.
Yeah, for sure. So I was talking about how one of the very first questions we talk about when we're thinking about trying to protect an invention or innovation is, what problems did you solve here? What problem very specific to this product did you encounter, and what's your unique specific solution? And a lot of times those solutions relate to whether it's durability of the product, or increased efficiency, or reduced cost. Any one of those things can be drivers, but it's such a compelling narrative to be able to tell to the patent office to say, we have the mousetrap and this hinge wears down after so many uses and can snap. And so we've reinforced it this way because really an overwhelming majority and almost all inventions are these incremental improvements. It's the small tweak we did to make it just a little bit better. And those incremental improvements, if they're novel, are the source of most of the patents in the world. So we identify those really from the outset. So those are the questions I ask. I say, you know, what's special, what's different, what did you do, what's that unique spark that we can lock onto when we're drafting the application and we're talking to an examiner to say, look, these people really did something. And so that, I think, lends support towards Adam's thoughts on let's test, find lots of things to potentially fix and come up with solutions to those. And then maybe to Bill and Jim's chagrin, I write about those problems and say, look, this was a real issue that we had, and we couch it as nicely as we can, but it's a problem. Here's a solution for it. Give us a patent. Thank you.
So great. It's so funny. When we started this conversation, I expected it to be more confrontational, where I'm talking about the importance of in a friendly way. Of course, I don't want to get sued, but you know, in a friendly way of, you know, confrontational, in the sense where I'm talking about do the right thing, be ethical, just talk about everything you can so that you have a chance to address everything you can. And, you know, and I pictured you discussing, they're like, no, you need to protect yourself. And, you know, and with those conversations, have the right limits on them and such and such. And then within a few minutes, I think we came up with a phenomenal solution, which is, you know, when I do my courses, my education on FMEAs, one of the things I say is I'm like, the key to the FMEA is not just a form you fill out. It's getting those people together. It's about getting the different disciplines together to look at problems from all those different angles, right? Because if you have an issue that looks like a mechanical issue, usually you just give it to the mechanical team and then they make it a mechanical issue, even if it's not, right? And really, by the time you discover it's a software issue, you've wasted a ton of time. With the FMEA, right out of the gate, all those people are looking at it and the software people are like, wait a second. So I always joke and I say, grab the lunch lady if you can, because she may use a product similar to yours and have a perspective, and you'll be shocked. And I've actually done almost the equivalent of that. We grabbed the executive admin because we just wanted a fresh perspective on something we were trying to figure out. And she had some really interesting insight. And so here we are is saying, why don't you grab somebody from the legal team as well, right? Why not? Why not get them in here to get that proactive involvement and perspective on their exactly in the spirit of FMEA, and they'll make sure you're documenting things in a way where you'll be glad you did if there's ever a dispute. So that to me, but tell me if I'm wrong, to me it seems like we're giving a very clean cut, I'm going to call it advice. You're going to say you're not providing counsel, but I feel like we just gave the audience, you know, an idea. I don't know what you want to call it, that, you know, of something you can do that kind of helps create that balance where I feel good ethically as an engineer saying you've explored everything, and you feel good as a lawyer wanting to protect your clients saying you've done the best job to protect yourself. Is that true, you think?
I think it's more like you're giving advice, and we're like Captain Barbossa in the old Pirates of the Caribbean movies. This is more like guidelines.
Guidelines.
But yeah, I think this is a good plan for companies moving forward.
Oh, that's great. Well,
Yeah,
guys, I'm so glad we got to do this. I'm so glad you reached out. And I'm very excited about the idea that UC7 just took on another functionality, right? Another way it helps customers. And
yeah, I can see it helping customers. You know, at some point I'd like to talk about, you know, what's the difference between use case 7 and use case 8? Where do you draw that line? Is everything use case 7? You know, or are certain things beyond the pale?
well, actually, it's interesting. I will make a comment on that, and that I would say use case 8 in a way is halt testing. Halt testing actually does testing stresses that you very clearly have acknowledged have no association to use case at all. And the benefit to that is you get to see failure modes, how things break down. And you may not know the real way that could happen in the field, but you might get an opportunity to improve robustness. Here's a quick example. An item that sits on a shelf in a lab in the most perfectly controlled conditions, probably doesn't move off that shelf in 20 years, the dust pattern is there from it, it's so stable and everything. So in a halt test, obviously use cases you could come up with would, you know, be with the initial ones don't include a lot of violence, physical impacts, all kinds of stuff. You might have one where you say, okay, it can be dropped once or twice off that shelf and it should still work. Halt testing would say, I don't care. Let's vibrate that thing up to 80 Gs. I want to blow it to pieces with vibration. I just want to see it shatter. How does it shatter? You know, and the engineers are like, why do that? That doesn't tell us anything. But the principle with Hall testing is it does. What it tells us is where the fractures will occur in the device. So why does that matter? Well, what if in manufacturing, you had a poor plastic injection? The plastic injection started to not be as thorough as it was. And at some point, that's going to cause quality defects and failures in the field. Well, guess what? We just found out that with poor injection, possibly where the first fractures would occur, where the weak points are. So in the Hall testing, when you see that, you might be able to say, oh, look, it broke here. I really didn't expect that. Oh, we can just change that shape here and make a gusset. It'll be way stronger and that's free. You just mitigated a significant amount of what could be quality defects in design. Now you have no idea. I call it blind design robustness improvement because you're totally blind, but you have improved it. So maybe that's kind of use case 8 where you say, to hell with use cases entirely. We're not going to even talk about them. How can I just destroy this product? And I've done one we had to do in a parking lot. It was so ridiculous. And we sold tickets basically because and it really yielded tremendous value. I'm not kidding. I ended up building a steel frame that looks like those frames that use to stop trains, you know, when they don't go to the end of the track, and put a huge piston on it that was smashing this thing. But the information we got was phenomenal. And yeah, so anyway, maybe that's it. Maybe that's use case 8.
And your use case 8 is my misuse case 1. And I love it because you're also creating the forensic evidence that helps the manufacturer defend a future case. When they see how a product has failed and they recognize it as, hold it, that failed under circumstances identical to our use case 8. Wow. Then we can go back and realize we've got a causation defense to this case. It didn't break because it was defective in its design. It broke because of this misuse. So
that's fascinating. We just made another important connection. So now here's a piece of a counsel I have for you. That's not official counsel.
Guidelines.
But it is that when you are doing litigation, ask the teams if they've done HALT testing, not ALT, HALT, H-A-L-T, because that report will document those failures and you know what was done with them, and that could be something that's of interest to you, and that might be a nice piece of evidence that's there that you were unaware could yield that information, because they dismiss it as, you know, probably within the context you'd be talking with them about, because they're like, you know, this has nothing to do with any use case, this has nothing to do with anything. Were just looking to see how things fell apart. So ask about that.
Great idea.
Yeah, that's the kind of testing that makes me nervous as a lawyer for my clients.
Yeah, exactly. There's ones I could tell you about where it had to be buried in the ground because we knew there was going to be so much kinetic energy and pretty cool stuff. Anyway, all right, guys. Well, I'm so glad we talked about this, and I have a feeling we'll be talking about it again.
Hope so. Thanks very much, Adam.
All right. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Adam.